ma il mio mistero è chiuso in me. Il nome mio nessun saprà, no, sulla pubblica lo dirò, quando la luce splenderà. Vincerò. Throughout the course of human history, there have always been opportunists who latched on to class struggles in order to fulfill their own nefarious agenda. Even in the time of William Wallace, in his struggle against the English, there were traitors among the Scots, such as the Scottish nobles, who played out William Wallace for their own material benefit.
You rotten bastard! Why? Why?
Longshanks acquired Wallace. So did our nobles. That was the price of your crown.
Die!
Even today, in the era of late-stage capitalism, you will see such traitors who falsify the doctrine of Marxism and Leninism and use it for their own insidious purposes in order to fulfill their own diabolical agenda. Hello and welcome back to the cruel, brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. I hope you're having an amazing day. Because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. And if I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Today, we are going to talk about 5 ex-socialists who betrayed the revolution. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and spread the good news around everywhere. So make sure you share my video to whomever you think requires it. Now I'm sure you've come across these videos on PragerU or any other right-wing media organization in which you have somebody claiming that they left the left, so to speak. Apparently this person used to be a left-winger, used to be a socialist, used to be a progressive, but all of a sudden they had a change of heart and then they decided, oh yes, that the right wing actually makes more sense. Take someone like Dave Rubin, for example, who is basically the modern day American equivalent of Ernst Röhm. Now, whether or not Rubin gets purged in the American equivalent of the Night of the Long Knives is another topic altogether. But the point is that these individuals who claim that they left the left were really never on the left to begin with. They were, in essence, opportunists. And today we're going to talk about 5 of the most famous left-wing opportunists who ended up siding with the right wing for their material interests, and how we can spot these individuals who infiltrate revolutionary movements. Let us begin. We're going to start with the least bad all the way to the worst. So in number 5 of this list, the least bad of all would be Litech. Now Litech was basically the leader of the CPM, the Communist Party of Malaya, who was basically a triple agent, who was spying for the French, who was spying for the British, and spying for the Japanese. In essence, Litech was basically the OG grifter, the original grifter, who had no sense of loyalty to anyone but himself. And the reason why I put him as number 5 on this list is basically because he was fundamentally just a greedy bastard who wanted to line his own pockets and run away. But he didn't really do much lasting damage to the revolution or to the socialist movement that much. So basically, Litech was a Vietnamese-born Chinese fellow who rose up the ranks of the CPM, and eventually he ended up becoming the party leader. And according to the autobiography of Peng, the next leader of the Communist Party, Litech was basically a triple agent. Nobody was aware of Litech's treacherous tendencies until he absconded in thousands and thousands of dollars worth of today's money to Bangkok. And that was when the party discovered that he had in fact been a triple agent who'd spied not only for the British but also the Japanese in exchange for not being tortured and possibly killed after getting captured by them. So the party, led by Peng, tracked Litech to Bangkok, and before Peng could get to him in order to interrogate him, he had been strangled by the Thai communists. Now, Peng was frustrated by this, of course, because he wanted to interrogate him. But Litech's execution, or his purging, made Peng the next leader of the Communist Party. So Litech goes as number 5 of this list because Litech was basically just a grifter with no loyalty to anyone. Basically somebody who was just greedy for money, but didn't really do much damage to the revolutionary movement. Now next on this list you have George Orwell, or a self-described democratic socialist. Now Orwell is remembered for his novels Animal Farm, as well as 1984, which warns about the totalitarian dystopia of a Marxist society. Well, there's a reason why Lenin really disliked Fabian socialists. And you can understand why, considering that Fabian socialists not only have contempt for the working class, but also they do not agree or they oppose the class struggle narrative and instead believe that power has to come not from bottom up, but from top down. Basically, that the elites in power ought to reform society. Basically, the Social Democrats could be described as Fabian socialists, because while they do believe that the people should be placated with social policies that make them not want to revolt, such as healthcare and public housing, they do not believe that political power ought to be held by the working class, but rather by an elite strata of higher-ups who get to dictate how the working class live, how the working class conduct their lives, and how the working class ought to be. So Orwell was not only a racist and a colonialist, and you can forgive him for having racist and colonialist views, since Karl Marx himself also held condescending and racist and colonialist views, as you would expect of someone from the Victorian era. But one thing you cannot really forgive is the fact that Orwell was basically an individual who had deep contempt for the working class. Yes, Orwell quite literally regarded the working class as being no different from farm animals, And in the novel Animal Farm, he basically demonstrates a dystopian future which will occur if the working class takes over the country. What's going to happen is that it's going to go into pandemonium, and that basically the only way for the farm to run smoothly and for the people in society to be happy is when you have a strata of elites running the farm, the society. The farm's basically a metaphor for society. So basically the only way is if you have someone like the farmer running society. You have an elite on top running society. That was basically Orwell's messaging in his novels. So his form of socialism was basically antithetical to the class struggle. Well, Social Democrats were the people who had Rosa Luxemburg shot, so I'm not really surprised. Alrighty, next on the list we have Thomas Sowell, who is basically every right-wing American Republican's token black friend in order to prove that they're not racist. Sowell supposedly started life as a Marxist, and you know, he had a change of heart sometime in the 1950s when he enrolled in Milton Friedman's classes as a student. Now, apparently, this is according to Sowell's anecdote, Sowell was an ardent Marxist when he joined neoliberal economics professor Milton Friedman's classes, and Milton Friedman apparently converted him to the wonders of the free market.
Continue the story if you would. You're a Marxist at the age of 19, taking the bus home from the southern third of Manhattan Island all the way up to Harlem. You remain a Marxist at the University of Chicago under the instruction of
Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman.
Yes.
How did that? If Milton couldn't crack you, you were a tough nut.
Well, but one summer working for the government as an economist was enough to show me that the government was really not the answer. That the level of understanding among the people, and I was in a program for interns where we saw the top officials of the Labor Department and so forth, and I realized these guys are not going to save us.
In other words, they were not the priestly caste that you might have been led to expect. They were ordinary chumps bashing their way through life as best they could like anybody else.
Yes.
I see. All right. And so, but intellectually, all right, you spend a summer working for the federal government, and that cures you of Marxism.
Yes.
But intellectually, when do you pick up the thread of free markets?
Oh, I guess. Well, I had always.
You thought back to what Milton had said.
That's right. It's not just Milton, but Hayek and the rest of them.
Okay.
Because I had read all those people while I was still a Marxist.
A couple of you have an essay in here entitled "Marx the Man."
Oh, yes.
Quote, Marx's angry apocalyptic visions existed before he discovered capitalism as the focus of such visions.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, if the poems he wrote in his teen years, one of them in particular I remember went to this effect that, then will I walk godlike and triumphant through the ruins of the world. So he has these apocalyptic visions early on before he's ever even thought about capitalism.
But I'm not sure what kind of a Marxist Sowell really was, since his whole shtick seems to be that socialism is revolved around human resentment, apparently. Yeah, apparently socialism is based on resentment and jealousy, which is hardly what the Marxist doctrine promotes, because resentment and jealousy is very different from class struggle, but hey, anything for money, right? Yeah, so Sowell has demonstrated some very, very, very troubling views, such as the whitewashing, so to speak, of Jim Crow, the whitewashing of racial segregation. According to his book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals, there was racial segregation in America in the 1950s and 1960s, not because of class society or divide and conquer politics or late-stage capitalism, but because of badly behaved blacks from the South. Yeah, that's your token black friend of the American Nazis for you. Anyway, I always find it quite hilarious when you hear liberal progressives saying, listen to women, listen to minorities. Okay, but which women and which minorities do you want to listen to? Do you want to listen to Malcolm X or Thomas Sowell? Do you want to listen to Rosa Luxemburg or do you want to listen to Eva Braun? Who do you want to listen to? God! Anyway, Sowell is almost 100 years old and he's about to meet his maker, so I really don't want to bash him any much longer, because that would be bullying an old man. Yes, so before he goes to hell, I wonder if he will try to repent, but anyway, that's not really my problem. Let's move to the next individual on this list. One of the most famous people in Southeast Asia, a person who has been mythologized in the minds and hearts of every Singaporean PAP fascist. Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, who apparently transformed Singapore from a backwater shithole into a global trading center. Because apparently Singapore had no civilization before Lee Kuan Yew. Apparently people like Sang Nila Utama didn't exist before Raffles and Lee Kuan Yew showed up. But anyway, Lee Kuan Yew also identified as a socialist at one point in his life. Well, Lee Kuan Yew is famous for his saying that I started life believing that all men were equal, but now I realize it is the furthest thing from the truth as possible. So Lee Kuan Yew started out in the 1950s as a Fabian socialist. During his time in Cambridge, he was in fact a member of the Fabian Society. But in his later years, Harry, as he was known back then, would recant socialism and basically not attach himself to any political ideology. That was his claim, that he didn't really align himself with any political ideology. But he was no longer a socialist in his older years, apparently. So he went from being a Fabian socialist, the sort of socialist that Lenin hated because they dampened the revolutionary spirit of the workers, to being, well, an anti-communist, an anti-socialist who had communists locked up, who essentially crushed the Singaporean left wing in what came to be known as a witch hunt called Operation Cold Store, which was basically a government purge against Marxist elements in Singaporean society. Yes, apparently this Asian McCarthyist was so paranoid by this Marxist plot in order to overthrow him that he had lots of people on the left wing, even if they didn't identify as Marxists, locked up in prison. Some of them were in prison for many, many years without trial. People such as left-wing activist Po Su Kai, for example, spent 26 years in prison. And Lim Chin Siong, the budding socialist leader of Singapore, who wasn't even a communist, whom Lee Kuan Yew at one point described as a very good friend, and who Lee Kuan Yew even said could become the next Prime Minister of Singapore, ended up being purged and thrown into prison. Yeah, so Lim Chin Siong, who was trying to unite the Singaporeans on the basis of class rather than race and religion, was basically thrown into prison as a so-called Marxist agitator in order for Harry to basically crush the Singaporean left wing and institute Bismarckian policies, basically. Yeah, I know that some very much less informed individuals will say that Lee Kuan Yew was a socialist, just a non-Marxian socialist, because he instituted public housing and public health care, and basically he in order to prevent the people from revolting, basically ensured that their basic needs were met. But he had profound contempt for the working class. He described laborers as being dumb and slow. He tried to institute eugenics policies that would discourage poor people from low-income families from having children. He even offered them a house if they would get themselves sterilized. And not surprisingly, many women from ethnic minority backgrounds were in the low-income bracket of Singapore. So he went from being a socialist to, in essence, becoming basically a lightweight fascist who wanted to create a society, a regimented and disciplined society in his own image that would have no tolerance for any left-wing deviation, and certainly no tolerance for Marxism. Well, and I'd say, considering that the Singaporean left wing is pretty cupped, I'd say he's done a pretty good job if that was what he wanted to achieve. I just have to make it clear that those of you who think that Lee Kuan Yew was remotely socialist must realize that socialism is not when the government does stuff, and socialism is certainly not when the government gives you public health care or public housing, which is produced with our tax money anyway, right? That's not socialism. Socialism is the collective, organized political power of the working class. That is socialism, a society in which the working class hold political power. So Lee Kuan Yew was, in essence, no different from an Otto von Bismarck type of character, but he certainly wasn't a socialist. Okay, number one on the list, I saved my favorite for last, is the OG why I left the left kind of guy. One of the most famous Italians in all of modern history. A man who would go shirtless to press conferences. A man who almost banned pasta in order to create a nation of vigor and strength. Benito Mussolini. One of the most famous ex-Marxists in human history.
Eccolo il mio popolo smarrito, bisognoso di uomini forti e idee semplici, i disperati, gli storti, i reduci della grande guerra.
Ci si vede a cena, Volpi?
Siamo l'orgoglio mutato in corte. Sapete cos'è la grande guerra? Sì! 1914-1918, l'Europa in fiamme, 4 anni di battaglie dalla Russia all'Italia, 10 milioni di morti, 21 milioni di feriti e un numero non quantificabile di reduci, di disperati, loro che sono qua per me. Albino Volpi, pluripregiudicato, volontario, caimano dal Piave. Valorosi soldati gli avevano promesso ricompense, premi, l'onore della vittoria e invece niente, neanche la pensione, soltanto il disprezzo di quelli che la guerra non la volevano e che non l'hanno fatta. Amerigo Dumini, americano appunto, ma ha scelto di fare la guerra per l'Italia. Battaglione d'assalto, la compagnia della morte. In questa ora putrida della pace, gli uomini della guerra senza più un posto nel mondo, congedati su 2 piedi come si licenzia una serva, sono i miei uomini. Io sento la loro rabbia, il loro odio. Ho solo loro e loro hanno soltanto me. E con il materiale scadente, con l'umanità di risulta, con gli ultimi che si fa la storia, si attizza la loro rabbia, gli si mettono in mano le bombe, le rivoltelle, e con loro farò la rivoluzione.
Abbiamo spinto a calci il paese in guerra,
e l'abbiamo condotto alla vittoria. Noi che abbiamo versato il sangue per la patria. Noi oggi fondiamo i fasci di combattimento per il futuro, l'avanguardia, la rivoluzione. Oggi nasce il fascismo.
Il fascismo, una creatura bellissima, fatta di sogni, di ideali, di coraggio, di cambiamento, che conquisterà milioni e milioni di cuori. Sono sicuro anche i vostri. Seguitemi. Anche voi mi amerete. Anche voi diventerete fascisti.
Mussolini is most famously known as the man who invented fascism, which is a 20th century political ideology, which was practiced by individuals such as Adolf Hitler, Hideki Tojo, as well as some very, very good fellows in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world which are opposed to Marxism, which is considered the arch nemesis of fascism. Now, I take the liberty to assume that people who are watching this channel have some inkling of what fascism is, so I'm not going to spend time explaining what fascism is. That is another video altogether, but I'll put a link in the description box of Benito Mussolini's essay entitled The Doctrine of Fascism, so you can get a clearer idea of what fascism really is. Anyway, Mussolini started life as a son of a blacksmith and a school teacher in northern Italy, and he began his political journey from socialist to fascist when he was influenced by the left-wing political views of his father, who was an anarchist. Mussolini then graduated from anarchism to Marxism, and he was an ardent socialist agitator in the 1900s, or at least he was putting on the show of being an ardent socialist agitator. I don't think Mussolini actually believed in it anyway. Mussolini started his political journey by being an editor of the left-wing Italian publication known as Avanti. But Mussolini, however, was expelled from the Socialist Party of Italy due to his problematic views, due to his views that were veering on right-wing nationalism. And from then on, he decided to join the army. Mussolini, upon leaving the army, was then cemented in his right-wing ideology. By that point in time, after the Great War, he had lost all faith that Marxism was the salvation of Italy, that the working class would play their historical role in seizing power from the ruling class and instituting a workers' state. Mussolini had lost all hope for that, or perhaps he never really believed in it in the first place. But at the end of the Great War, he was a fervent nationalist and had shifted his views on many aspects, including imperialism. And while he was editing the Avanti publication, Mussolini was a fervent anti-imperialist, or at least in public, at least he was a fervent anti-imperialist. But at the end of the Great War, well, he had become an ardent imperialist who believed that the only way for Italy to survive, really, was by being a strong nationalist state with constant expansion of living space, if you know what I mean. Expansion of living space in the same way the Americans or the founders of modern America infringed on Native American territory and killed and persecuted the native inhabitants. That was Mussolini's idea for Italy. Basically a revival of the Roman Empire, so to speak. And many soldiers at the end of the war who had been driven into poverty, who had no means of employment, what Marx terms the Lumpenproletariat, or the dangerous class, who are basically declassed elements who are susceptible to being employed by the reactionary forces, if we do not win them over. Well, they ended up joining up with Mussolini because they saw Mussolini as a comrade who had been in the trenches with them during the war. So they trusted him. And eventually, he had thousands of these people, these disenfranchised young men who lacked employment, who didn't have families, who had nothing to look forward to in life, on his side. And these individuals came to be known as the Black Shirts, who would go around persecuting and torturing and killing Mussolini's former comrades, the Socialists. Eventually, in 1922, Mussolini instigated one of his biggest, most hardball moves, which was known as the March on Rome, in which he organized a massive group of black shirts in order to march to Rome, in order to demand a position in government. And, well, the weak Italian government at the time thought that, Mussolini was just a temporary phase. He seems popular, let's just give him the post as prime minister, just for a while, and within 4 or 5 years he'll be gone. But oh, were they wrong. 39-year-old Mussolini was appointed prime minister, and before long he had abolished the role and turned himself into the dictator of Italy. Democracy is a beautiful thing, isn't it? Because it also allows you to abolish it. So, Mussolini, as dictator of Italy, basically went around suppressing all left-wing individuals. He not only killed them and tortured them to break their spirit, he also basically went after ethnic minorities, like the Jews. Now, Mussolini didn't have that kind of rabid Anglo-Saxon hatred towards Jews, but his alliance with Nazi Germany meant that he had to show the same kind of hostility towards the Jewish community so that he could be Hitler's friend. And as a result, many thousands were persecuted and thrown into concentration camps. So Mussolini was eventually killed in 1943, if I'm not mistaken. But the fact is that he died like a coward, basically, trying to run away to Switzerland. And he was apprehended on the way by communist partisans who had him executed with his mistress. So now we've talked about these 5 ex-socialists who brought massive damage to the movement. And the next part of the video is going to be talking about how we can spot these individuals so that we don't end up being played by these infiltrators, these reactionary infiltrators who never really believed in the doctrine of socialism in the first place. Now, one way you can do this is by looking at who is attacking the ruling class. Who is attacking the ruling class? And then you look at the people who are attacking the people who are attacking the ruling class, while at the same time claiming to be real left-wingers or real socialists. So if you see in my comment section, for example, if you see my haters or the detractors on my Twitter page or my YouTube channel, it's clear who these modern-day Mussolinis really are. Those people, like this guy, for example, who calls me a counter-revolutionary because I do not attack the Malays. Or like this fellow, for example, who claims to be a real socialist, but is at the same time a capitalist tech investor. And isn't that ironic? Because fascism is, in essence, a coalition between corporate power and government power. So it's very ironic that this guy, who also uses German terms, by the way, is saying that he's a real socialist while I'm a fake champagne socialist, and making up lies about my family, claiming that they are Chinese racists who discriminate against the Indian community. So it's very easy to spot these modern-day Mussolinis who claim to be left-wing but are really fascist infiltrators when you look at who is attacking the people who are attacking the ruling class. That is how you spot them. And no, not everybody who claims to be left-wing, not everyone who claims to be a socialist is a socialist. We need to be wary of these wolves in sheep's clothing who infiltrate the left and inject their poison. So look out for things like identity politics, like trying to play the races against each other, like trying to claim that this race is oppressing that race, just like how Hitler claimed that the Jews are oppressing the non-Jews, right? And Hitler himself identified as a national socialist. Because there's the fascists and the socialists, you see, are like Sith and Jedi. Or I should say the socialists and the fascists are like Jedi and Sith. They both are opposite ends of the Force, meaning that the Jedi use the light force while the Sith use the dark force. Basically, the socialist basically appeals to people's material conditions, their grievances with their material conditions. And the fascist does the same thing as well. The fascist also recognizes that people have bad material conditions. But the socialist blames the capitalist class and the ruling class, while the fascist, rather than blaming the capitalist class, chooses to blame certain races or people of certain ethnic backgrounds. That is the difference between the socialists and the fascists. So look at so-called left-wingers who are basically pointing at people of certain races or people of certain religions or what have you as being the main problem of society, rather than the capitalist class. Or look at people who try to falsify the doctrine of Marxism by saying that race is a proxy for class. Race is not a proxy for class. No, class is one's relation with the means of production, not one's genetic material that they're born with. So yeah, just be vigilant, because socialism is unstoppable, but the reactionaries are still going to try doing whatever they can to derail the movement by infiltrating our movements and trying to put a damper in it. So be vigilant, and selamat berjuang, happy struggle, and I'm going for lunch now. Bye-bye!